All right, can you all hear me? Thumbs up. All right. How's everybody doing tonight? Excited that this is almost the end of 2020. Very happy that it's Christmas time. I'm seeing some faces smiling up. Okay, so what I want us to do before we jump in is really just take a second just to pause and breathe because we have some cool things to get to tonight, and I want to make sure that everybody has some time just for a second to really regroup before we jump in. So I'm gonna give us 2 minutes. If you want to turn your cameras off, you can, and just do sort of 3 large deep breaths before we jump in. All right, so start. Okay. All right, I did my 3. So if you've done your 3, put your camera back on so we can dive back in. All right. So I want to just sort of start so that we can have enough time. I do recognize that you all have sort of talked about becoming experts in sort of data, policy, training, and budget. So I have heard sort of these concerns, and we will really get to that tonight. For the definition of ready for this meeting, team members have read over the identified areas of the data guidebook. So we know there's a lot of information. We sort of highlighted the pieces that would be crucial to you all joining us tonight. And the definition of done will be that you all have a general understanding of how Red Wing currently collects police department data and what other cities are doing to collect data for best evidence-based practices. We're going to discuss general ideas on what other information you feel you need, and then what possible recommendations you would like to start discussing for Red Wing, given what you've learned about data and how it's collected. So that's sort of the definition of done. So we can jump right in. We're going to do the around the table. So this is going to just be Michelle sort of popcorning everybody to check in. Please give one word on how you're feeling, and then one small thing you did over the weekend that brought you joy, relief, relaxation, time away from others, or time with others. So Michelle, go ahead and popcorn us so we can get started.
Okay. I'm just going to say your name. We'll start with Juan. I think we're going to do, what do we say on our agenda? One word about how you're feeling and one small thing you did over the weekend to bring joy, relief, or relaxation.
I'm feeling amazing. And one thing my girlfriend and I did, we put the Christmas tree up and got the decorations up and was able to put up some Christmas decorations that brought some joy to us.
Awesome. Great. Liz.
I'm feeling quarantined. And what we did over the weekend, because we're in a family quarantine with a positive child, is we put up Christmas decorations and decorate our tree as a family. Lots of family time.
Good. Good. Okay. Thanks. Cholaway. Where's Cholaway? Oh, there.
I think she disappeared.
Oh no. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, my internet is a little bit slower, so I have to catch up with. I'm feeling really great. And over the weekend, I spent time with family. We played pool and ping pong. And a little bit of gym, that was different, but it was good.
Good. Thank you. Michael.
I really don't have too much to report. I mean, people know how I feel, so.
Okay. Doug.
Feeling busy, and I guess this weekend we put up some Christmas decorations.
Okay. Okay, good. Corey K.
I am feeling energized tonight. This weekend, I got to spend time with my two kids who are home from college and catch up on their amazing adventures, and feel kind of proud as a dad that they are doing really good in their first semester, even given the quarantine. And both of them went through COVID, and they're sailing on through and making the best of it. So
Good. Awesome. This is great. Sarah.
I'm feeling a little bit tired, but I'm here. And this weekend we went and cut down a Christmas tree and decorated it. So that was fun.
Awesome. Thank you. Sam.
I'm feeling a little bit exhausted. Just
I think we lost. I wonder if Sam, I wonder if you should click down. Will you say that one more time?
if I don't respond, if call this one back, so
Okay.
I don't respond when called on because I didn't hear.
Okay. Okay. Tell us one quick thing though, if you're here for a minute. What was one thing you did over the weekend? We kind of missed that.
Me?
Mm-hmm. Because we
Oh,
missed
it was
it. You
my-
were kind of out.
It was my 30th birthday, so I had a babysitter, and me and my husband just kind of stayed in the house and relaxed and did nothing pretty much, but
That sounds good. Good. I like that. Let's see, Steve.
You're on mute.
About now?
Good.
Verizon, can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Like Sam, exhausted, been working outside the last 3 days. Got home late from work, so I'm just finishing up my supper, so you'll see me chewing here for another minute or two, but this weekend we got all our Christmas stuff up, so we always enjoy that, and the stockings and all that good stuff, and hopefully we'll be able to have family and friends over at the end of the month to enjoy with us.
All right. Thank you. Yadira.
Well, yeah, I'm exhausted too, just from all the at-home distance learning things with my kids. And over the weekend, just kind of stayed home, went outside a little bit. And then we just got a little small kit to make a gingerbread house, and we just did it with the kids.
Great. Thank you. Awesome. And Alexis.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Okay. Sorry, yeah, my camera's off because I feel sick for one. So like really sick.
Shoot.
And
Sorry to hear that.
one thing I did, well, my birthday was yesterday, so I celebrated on the weekend. And then I put up a tree with my son and my boyfriend.
Good. We hope you feel better.
Thank you. I just didn't want to miss the meeting, even though I
Yep.
don't really feel
Nope.
that well.
That's totally good. Nope, you can keep your camera down. That's great. And Thomas called and he's not able to come tonight. And then Corey H. Where's Corey H? I can't see you on the screen. Oh,
Feeling
there you
good.
are. Corey Herbie. Okay. Super D. Okay.
Feeling good. Got Christmas decorations up this weekend as well.
Okay. And Roger.
I'm also feeling good. A little disappointed because my iPad doesn't seem to be working real well, so I have to have the sound come over my phone while I have the screen up for the camera. But yeah, and then just read a book this weekend to unwind and disconnect.
Good. Awesome. Great. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. And I appreciate everybody from the, we just want to say a quick thank you to people from the public. And it sounds like people are kind of getting the general rules here. If you're a team member, you're up on camera. And if you're from the public, you're muted and cameras off. And we look forward to when we can all be in a room together. But I will, let's see. Oh, I was going to pass this to Dominique, but do you want, Dominique, should we just go right into the recommendations, or do you want to?
Yeah. But before we do that, I just want to wish everybody sort of who had birthdays, happy birthdays. I hope that you have some time to actually get outside. These birthdays don't count. This is a COVID birthday. So next year, just re-celebrate your 30th birthday, Samantha, and Alexis, you re-celebrate. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And Michelle is going to do a recap of sort of the recommendations that we've come up with. And I really want to just dive into the work because it's lots to talk about.
Yep. This will be very, very short. I will quickly share this screen. And this is what I'm sharing here. And what I thought was going to be here. Let's try that again. This is why I don't do this, okay? You all probably saw this, but these are the recommendations. This is what it's supposed to be. Let's try this one more time. Okay, there we go. Can you all see that? You should see a piece of paper with the logo on it. Dominique, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, because I can only see a few of you, you and Juan.
Oh, gotcha, yes.
Yeah, so very briefly, there are 4 recommendations that this group went through last meeting. I've kind of typed those up. If there are major concerns, we can have discussions about that. But here are the main bullet points. One is at the police department. This would be recommendations that this group would make to city council, that they would prioritize hiring a bilingual officer, that the police department, next bullet, that representatives would work closely with Hope Coalition to review in detail the program that we learned about, You Have Options, and bring back a report to this advisory team in late spring on how the police department could potentially implement this program. The idea is that they would go and look at logistics and find out if that can or cannot happen and bring back a report to this team. The third one is that the police would also work closely with Hope to review the FETI training, that forensic experiential trauma interview training. That is for anyone really who has trauma, not just sexual assault, could be hate crimes or domestic abuse or anything like that, and bring back a report to this advisory team in summer at the latest on how the Red Wing Police Department could potentially implement this training. It's really to look and see how logistically that could happen or not, and bring back to the advisory team its recommendations. And then the fourth one is that the police department detectives and Hope Coalition advocates would set up a series of meetings throughout the year. That was, this group said, yes, it would be important to build relationships so that when they're working together on cases, they have that trust built up. This basically says that if council approves this recommendation, it would direct police staff to actually implement and operationalize that change. So the idea is that when you bring these to council then can say to the police department, yes, they want folks to be spending time and resources figuring out if these things can happen. I'm assuming everybody kind of read through some of the other things, so we don't need to go through that. There was discussion on the actual policy change. There were a lot of unsures, and so we want to come back to that at a later time when we get to policy writing. There were a few things that you agreed for yourself, that you would look at data. The second bullet point, that the advisory team would spend learning about the budget, and that at a later date, it would come back to really looking into policies for those who are wrongly accused and discuss how the police department could implement policies around that. And finally, there are some bullets here that the community can look at that really aren't within the scope of the advisory team, but these are things that you all said are things you wish or hope that folks in the community can look at and hope happens. So those are the documents, and I will stop sharing for a minute so that we can see everybody. Those are the things that the group agreed upon, at least at the last meeting. And so I don't think that we need to probably go into a lot of detail going back over all that. But if there are questions right now that you would like to say, hey, I don't understand that, or I would like to discuss one of those bullets, you could just raise your hand right now and let me know that. It's not to say that we're going to get into a deep discussion on those things right now, but I would just note it. I didn't get any comments back up by email, but I'm just wondering if there are any comments right now. Okay. Oh, there's Michael. Okay. I see you.
So all we're going to focus on is just the sexual assaults and domestic assaults?
Well, those were just the first set of recommendations. So recommendations will go to council in chunks. And so that was just the first section, but now we're looking at what data says overall. So I would say that's the first area we've covered. Do you want to say more about that though? Okay, I'm going to call you tomorrow, Michael. Okay. Okay. No. Okay. Okay. So I think what we'll do, I'm going to hand it over to Dominique, and she is going to lead us through the rest of the meeting.
So actually right on schedule. Yes. So I have been sort of trying to think about the best ways to bring you all information around the data collection piece that you all have been asking about. And I'm going to let the chief say a few words about this, but I wanted to let you all know that we have some of the best data folks at CPE. And so I reached out to a colleague of mine who has been helping me in other cities when we talk about data, how to collect it, working with chiefs to be able to sort of give some evidence-based responses to that and helping to have communities think about what they want to collect and the best ways to do that. And so I want to introduce Dr. Rob Kenter. He is the Director of Law Enforcement Field Engagement for CPE. And he retired in April 2020, but he served more than 30 years with the Norfolk Police Department. And during the last 6 years served as special assistant to the chief in charge of special projects, research, and data analysis. And so he really spends a lot of time helping me think about policing and data and how communities and police departments can collect the best data and work better together. And so he's going to be here to present and answer questions and help you all think about what you want to collect for Red Wing, what's currently there to collect, and then how to move that conversation forward. The goal is that in January 2021, when you all go to council, you'll have sort of recommendations for what kind of data Red Wing should be collecting and how you want to sort of implement that with the department. I'm going to have Chief sort of say something because just to be transparent with you, he has sort of been working with Rob, and I want to give him a chance to talk about that.
Okay, thank you, Dominique. And yeah, I'm very excited. Anytime we have the opportunity to increase our knowledge and expand learning opportunities is always a good thing. So I just kind of wanted to introduce Dr. Kenter by saying that the Red Wing Police Department is constantly reviewing ways to improve our service to our community, and the usage of in-house research to support our symbolic or conceptual usage of data is critical to improve department efficiency, and we look forward to working with Dr. Kenter to improve our data collection, which in turn will improve our department efficiency, as I mentioned, but also build our community relations. And with that, I would like to now turn it over to Dr. Kenter, who I've talked with quite often this past week and have the pleasure of working with him. Thank you.
Hi, how you all doing tonight? First, before I really get into the data, I'd like to explain some crime patterns. And after I talk about the data, this will make more sense when I talk about using the data to create efficiencies. So we know a few things about, we know a few things about crime. We know a great deal of crime happens in small geographic areas. And this is, maybe in the past 15 years, people have come forward with this, and we call those hotspots, right? Violent crime hotspots. And we know something else about those violent crime hotspots, that there's certain characteristics that are generalizable across the country and probably across the world. Those characteristics you find within those hotspots. You'll find high degrees of poverty, a large amount of blight, low amount of social capital, neighbors don't know each other, and they're transient. But the one thing that is really people are really starting to discover is you find there's a high amount of preventable chronic diseases within the people living in those violent crime hotspots. Now, they don't cause the crime. However, it's important to realize that all those things put together create an atmosphere in which crime can thrive. So within those violent crime hotspots, there's a small amount of people responsible for a large amount of crime. All right, and there's plenty of data out there to support that. So with that background, we'll start talking about data. Now, at the Center for Police and Equity, we collect data. We have the largest database in the world on police behaviors, and we collect data on 3 distinct police behaviors: use of force, pedestrian stops, and traffic stops. And we take that data and we analyze it for disparities. And then we give recommendations back to the cities. But one of the important things is you have to have race data to identify disparities. And with my conversations with the chief, I found out that the state doesn't collect race data. They don't mandate it for pedestrian stops and vehicle stops. So that's an issue that we've identified a gap in the data, and the chief's going to start collecting that moving forward, which is a very important thing, because you can't identify those disparities if you don't know what the race of the people that have been stopped are. So, and that's for pedestrian stops and vehicle stops. The chief has race data for use of force, and that's something that you can analyze now. So we, me and the chief, we talked it over, and CPE recommends that officers use the perceived race of the person, what they think their race is. However, if they're not sure, I recommend it to the chief that the officer just asks, what race do you identify as? And I don't think anyone would be, and we can talk about that later, but I don't think anyone would be offended by that question, but you're the best to answer that question. But I want to say many police departments have large gaps in their data like Red Wing does. And it doesn't matter if they're small, big, or medium size. We found across the country that that police departments in general don't collect good data. So I commend Red Wing for identifying that and wanting to move forward with better data. That's a huge step in the right direction. Some of the reasons that you want to collect that data is for accountability, of course, right? So that's one of the big things we like to talk about is accountability. When you identify those disparities, doesn't necessarily mean the police department's racist. It just means there's disparities in how they do their work. And you have to dig a little further to find out why those disparities are. Right? There may be some outliers. You may have some officers who pull over a lot of the people in the black community for minor offenses. Right? But when you start looking at that data, you find out that those traffic stops are happening in an area where there's not a lot of violent crime. So, now we're getting into efficiencies. You want to redeploy those people in those areas that have violent crime and concentrate on the small amount of people that are creating a large amount of the crime. So when you collect this data properly, you can identify and hold officers accountable for their actions. That's number one. And one of the biggest things is efficiency, right? So when I talk about efficiency, I'm talking about officers spending the amount of time that they have between calls of service in the right sections, paying attention to the right people. Right? So what happens often is police departments will identify a violent crime hotspot, and in most cities, it's a low-income area, and it's minorities, right? So a large minority population, but they won't take the important next step in identifying that small amount of people responsible for a large amount of crime, and they wound up making their disparities worse by stopping everyone in that community. And in an effort to build trust and legitimacy, by fighting crime in that neighborhood, they actually reduce the trust and legitimacy even to a lower rate by indiscriminately stopping everyone within that neighborhood. So those are some of the big, high level topics when we talk about data. Let me see if I missed anything. Yes, and one of the big things that CPA looks for is what we call the hit rate. So we're going to work with the chief to really have his officers take good notes and collect data on everyone they stop and search by race. And what we found is, consistently across the country, is members of the Black community are stopped at a higher rate, searched at a higher rate. However, evidence of a crime is found at an incredibly low rate compared to the members of the white community. So we at CPE call that burdensome policing. So that's how we identify burdensome policing. One of the major red flags, if that hit rate is really low for the Black community and they're searched a lot, and the white community is searched less, but they find so much more evidence of a crime from members of the white community, it shows that that level of suspicion for the Black community is lower than the level of suspicion for the white community, right? So that's a huge red flag, and that's something we address with our police departments when that happens, and it happens often. I suspect it's going to happen in Redwood, but we don't know yet until we start collecting that data. And when we have the data, we'll have a benchmark baseline to start from, and then we can start addressing issues on how to mitigate all those instances of disparities. But that's the one big thing I wanted to talk about was that hit rate. Right? That's something we really want to pay attention to. And that's a real good indicator of burdensome policing against the minority community, and most likely the Black community, because no matter what the ratio of minorities are, it is the Black community that has the most burdensome policing applied to them. So you could have a community that has a lot of Native American, indigenous community, you have a lot of Hispanics, and not a whole lot of Black people. But for whatever reason, it's the Black community that gets the most burdensome policing. So that's something we can pay attention to. But, I've spoke to the chief, and he really wants to start collecting this data because he feels that his officers are policing fairly, but we can't support what he feels because we don't have the data, and we will have the data here shortly. So that's a really important step in the right direction. So with that, I'm going to stop and pause and see if you have any questions. You want to go deeper into something, we can certainly do that.
Looks like Liz, Doug, and Michael.
Go ahead, Liz.
So I guess my question is more for Chief Pullman. When saying you didn't collect data in the past, why not, if it was knowledge of how beneficial it was? And I can't imagine the police department hasn't been asked for this information prior. So how was that answered when other people, groups, officials asked for this racial data that we didn't have?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. That's a good question. And, the last racial traffic stop collection that was mandated by the state of Minnesota was in 2002. And what they did was they asked for municipalities to voluntarily collect data on traffic stops And in return, when the study was over, the state purchased in-car video camera systems for all marked squad cars for those agencies that participated. So in 2002, Red Wing did participate in the data. 2003, the final report had come out, and then also the state provided the in-car videos for the patrol cars. Now, something else that also happened back out of that study was the Minnesota Post Board required a mandatory department policy on racial profiling. And all departments throughout the state have to have that policy that covers the key elements that the state identified on racial profiling. Now, since that time, as you're aware, I became chief of Red Wing in 2012, and I have not been asked for that data. When asked if it was required or collected, we've talked a lot about in the state associations and agencies that I belong to. And one thing that makes it difficult is Minnesota does not require a race to be placed on a driver's license. So therefore, you're either allowing it up to the assumption of the law enforcement officer to guess what the race is, which in today's time is very difficult because we have many biracial families now in our society. So to really try to guess is really doing a disservice, I think, to our citizens. And then again, I talked with Rob about this, and, you know, one thing that I'm always concerned about is collecting data that helps us improve our service to the community by reducing the amount of crime and such. And I never found the correlation there that drove me to look into trying to collect that data, because it just isn't required out there from the state and within the state of Minnesota. And if that answers your question, but
Sorta. I mean, I know it wasn't required. I guess I was just, but if knowledge was that it was good to have, I mean, I appreciate that they're going to start doing it going forward, because research is showing that it's good to have. But, and I understand how it's hard to identify, because my children themselves can identify 3 different ways. I mean, they're honestly 50% Ojibwe, but anybody who looks at them says they're black, and they're wrong every time, because they're almost, you know, they're way more Ojibwe than they are anything else. And they've been mistaken since the day we brought them home to Red Wing. But did we get information one of our very first meetings where people were broken down by ethnicity? So then how did the police department get that?
yeah, I can't remember the context that came out in, but as I said, and Rob kind of alluded to it, on traffic stops and pedestrian contacts, we do not collect race or ethnicity. However, for our NIBRS, which is our FBI state and federal reporting requirements, which is National Incident-Based Reporting System, they require us on Group A and Group B offenses to report race with those arrests. So that is only regarding an arrest.
One second.
Just to let you know, some of the Group A and Group B offenses are more crimes against property and more violent crimes against property and crimes against persons. So we do have those numbers regarding arrests for crimes, but nothing regarding a traffic stop or a pedestrian stop.
Chief, could you go more into just giving an example of a Group A versus a Group B? I think that would be helpful for folks.
Yes, absolutely. I've got quite a few here, but to give you an idea, Group A offenses would include arson, assaults, briberies, burglaries, vandalism, damaged property, drugs, narcotics, fraud, gambling, homicide, trafficking, kidnapping, larceny thefts, which are like stolen property, motor vehicle theft, sex offenses, robberies, stolen property, weapon law violations all fall under Group A, and there's a few more. But it kind of gives you the idea of the types. And then Group B offenses would include bad checks, loitering, vagrancy, disorderly conduct, driving under the influence, drunkenness, family offenses that are nonviolent, liquor law violations, peeping toms, trespass on real property, and those would fall under the Group B offenses.
Gotcha. Thank you. So Doug had a question, and then Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand a little more about the hit rate, or what the specifics of that. Is it percentage based on like a percentage of the white population that stopped, you find something, or is it just the total number of stops you find something? And same thing with the black community or whatever community you're keeping track of. That question makes sense. Is it comparing just number of times something's found, or is it percentage of the representation of that group within the population?
We would take that data and then convert it to percentages. So you have something to compare it to. And it would be the number of white people stopped, and then a subcategory would be a number of those people, how many people those people stopped did you search? And then another subcategory is how many times did you stop and search and then actually find evidence of a crime? And that's one of the huge indicators for us of Ferguson Police, we call it, because I don't know any department, we've worked with probably 100 departments across the country, large and small, in which the black community was searched more and evidence of a crime was found 5, 6, 7, 8 times less than the white community.
As a percentage of that part of the population.
Oh, I would say 40% more, 50% more in the white community than the black community. It's statistically significant, and when I started looking at these numbers, I had no idea how much of a difference there was, how big that disparity was.
Thanks.
All right. So I want to give Michael a chance. You're all good? Okay. Anybody else have questions that they want to ask? Or are you thinking of things that you want to talk about in terms of collection that is happening in Red Wing or isn't? And, how do you want to go about thinking about sort of the gaps here? It looks like Sarah has her hand up, and then Liz.
Is collecting the race data on the pedestrian and traffic stops something that's going to go to the council to be a requirement? Or is this just Chief saying, yes, we're going to do this?
We have someone who's on their phone who, if you could mute your phone, that would be great, because we're have you listed as caller user number 5. So if caller user number 5 can mute their phone, that would be awesome. Thanks. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it was 6.
Was it 6?
Yeah,
It sounds like it's good now, I think. Oh, 6. Okay, thank you. All right, sorry to butt in. Who was talking?
Sarah.
Okay.
I guess I don't know if that question was for me, Sarah. This is Chief Coleman, but I guess my thought is that if the advisory team would like us to collect data on that, we will make that happen. I'm going to have to work with our person with our record management system to make sure that we can collect the data that we need to make sure we get valid and reliable reporting. And that's something also that Rob and I will work together on to make sure that I get the categories that we need because they have the experience. And you know, if we are going to spend time collecting that data, I want to make sure it's reliable and valid. And Rob will help us, or I'm sorry, Dr. Kenter will help us achieve that goal with our data.
And please call me Rob, Chief. And we use the census categories, but I'm interested in getting a feel from the group. Would you find that offensive if someone asked you what race you identified as? Okay, see, that's good to know, because, you know, Chief was a little concerned about that, but it's something like that has to come from the community. The community can decide what they find offensive and what's not, and it's important to have that feedback for the chief. Because, you know, personally, I have a son that was adopted from Korea. He's 75% Korean, 25% black. So today he identifies as Korean and he looks Korean. But, you know, there may be a time when he identifies as black and he looks Korean, he looks Asian. So, you know, I think the way to get good data is to ask people if you're not sure. And I wouldn't imagine that would be offensive to anyone. I guess it depends how it's presented too. So, you know, we have to be mindful about that when we advise the chief, right? It has to be presented in a respectful manner, not in a sarcastic manner. And, you know, that's one of the key points. But we have to get good data. We have to get good data in order to make recommendations and get a baseline on where the disparities are. You know, we can geographically plot pedestrian stops and vehicle stops out in the town too, and find out if they're being, if the chief's deploying his officers strategically, or are they making a lot of pedestrian stops in areas that don't have a lot of crime, right? So we'll know that in 4 or 6 months after we start collecting the data, and we can look at it, and then we can start moving those chess pieces on the board. But it's a very powerful tool to have, is all that data. Go ahead, Liz. I'm sorry, can I cut this?
Yeah, Dr. Kender, I totally agree. It's how it's asked. We had a former superintendent that joked with my kids one time if he could categorize them according to what category needed boasting in the school test scores, because they're Hispanic, Native, and African American. Of course, he was joking, but it was nice of him to ask that way. I don't find it would be offensive if you do ask, because a lot of people are miscategorized. Dr. Kenter and Chief Pullman, are there other areas that Red Wing is currently not collecting data in that you feel would be beneficial for our community to have, besides the stopping? Other areas that we're not doing that you would feel we should be?
And we found that the most reliable data to collect from police departments are the big three we call. The three behaviors of police behaviors is use of force, pedestrian stops, and vehicle stops. And that's the most reliable data that we've found. And CPE has the largest collection. No one has a bigger collection of police data, not even the FBI, than CPE does.
Okay, so those, Chief Pullman, those are the three areas that we will start collecting then in Red Wing?
He already has data. He collects data on use of force, the race data on use of force.
Okay, so the other two areas, we will start, Red Wing will start collecting the other two areas.
Well,
Yes,
that would be the
traffic and
recommendation.
pedestrian stops, yeah.
So that would be the recommendation that the group would have to make. So if that's something that you all would agree upon, which it seems like a consensus here, but that would be something that is up for discussion, you know, and that's where you would want to start talking about that and thinking about, is that something that you want to do, and how would you sort of collect it? Would we want to propose that it's like, Rob says 4 to 6 months, you know, to really get good data. So are we thinking about collecting it are we recommending that we collect it for a period of 4 to 6 months and then come back and analyze it together? Is it something where you want to collect it for a year? You have to think about those things. So Sarah, it looks like your hand's up.
Yes, do we collect data, or Chief, do you collect data on stops where no citation is given? Like if you stop someone, give them a warning, or talk to them about something, but nothing else. Is that documented somehow?
Yes, yep. We document whether they were given a verbal warning, a written warning, citation, or if the citation's even mailed later. Yeah, our system allows us to pull that data, but nowhere on there is race currently identified.
Juan,
I
it
was.
looked like your hand was up.
Who did?
It looked like Juan's hand was up, but my camera like blinked out. No? Okay.
I just got a quick question. So if this does become a recommendation, would the officer make it known to the person that got pulled over that this data being collected for, doing some research? I feel like just to get more numbers that are actually accurate. I know I can say that I wouldn't get offended if they were asked, if I was asked, but I can't speak for everyone. And so, yeah, I was just wondering.
I would certainly recommend that the chief and the city of Red Wing socialize this through press releases, so everyone knows that the police department is going to be doing this, and make it a forward, external-facing change, and really let the community know that from this point on. And I'm not recommending that the chief collects race data for 6 months. My recommendation was that Red Wing collects race data for pedestrian stops and vehicle stops from this point on. I'm suggesting we come back in 4 to 6 months and we look at it to get the baseline, and then continually, every 6 months, every year, you look at it and see which way the disparities are. They going sideways? Are they going down? Are they going up? But I would certainly recommend, and Dominique can speak about this, that the rest of the community find out about this, so it's no surprise to anyone. So everyone knows about it, and everyone's expecting that question in the case that they get pulled over. That's not the first time they're hearing about it.
And you all are representatives on the advisory team, but maybe it's something where you all would feel comfortable doing a community survey about it. As you're making the recommendations, you all are representing the community, but that is a possibility if you're trying to get more intel around if this is a possibility or not for you all. It looks like Samantha has her hand up.
I just wanted to kind of speak on what Juan said about asking your race if, stopped. I can't say whether or not, it's kind of obvious my race, I think, but I can't say whether or not I would be offended or take it personal if somebody asked me what race my children were, because sometimes it is hard to identify. I think it all depends on who is asking me and the tone of voice they're using, the context, why, where, when, how. Like, I think that it's a very delicate subject, especially right now, that I think most, especially people of color in our community, I can't speak for everyone, but I think that it all would depend on the circumstances. I think that it would be offensive right off the bat if it wasn't explained to them why the question was being asked first. Because I know that I've been in that boat when people have asked me what race my children are, and I've gladly, said their race without any questions asked, nothing. There's also been times where I've been like, why does that matter? Just because of the way it was asked to me. So I think I'm all for the recommendation of this, the data collection, but I think that the asking what race you are needs to definitely be explored before making any definite decisions, because in our community especially, I feel like it's probably not going to be a good turnout if we're asking people what race they are when they're pulled over or stopped on the sidewalk. But like I said, I can't speak for everyone. That's just how I see it.
Rob, can you talk a little bit about, in the guidebook when it was talking about some communities do it based on officer perception and some do it based on asking, and I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to talk about. I remember reading about those two different ways, and different ones have different pros and cons, and I don't know.
And they certainly do. And yeah, as you all brought up, it's a double-edged sword, because you don't want to offend anyone. However, you want to gather good data. So you could use the officer's perception. However, that may not give you the best data. So is the community willing to give up the reliability of some of the data versus having uncomfortable conversations? And that's something the community has, and that's really place matters in that conversation. Here in Norfolk, Virginia, believe it or not, we are, in the deep South. Well, not the deep South, but we're pretty far south. Right before I left, officers started asking people what gender they identified as. And that was uncomfortable conversations until we really we had the conversations with the LGBTQ community, and they wanted us to ask what they identified and what pronouns they wanted us to use, the police department to use if they were arrested. I wrote a policy. It's hard conversations, but after the first couple of times, it comes second nature, but it has to be done respectfully. But that's a decision that has to be made in the community. Like the community here in Norfolk wanted it. They wanted gender identity to be asked. We gather race data. It's on our driver's license. And so that's not a question. However, that gender identity question was something we started asking about a year ago here in Norfolk. But it really is place matters. Place matters.
I want to get a temperature check on sort of what you all are hearing and what is resonating for you or what's leaving you sort of puzzled. If sort of people could talk about what's resonating positively for them, and then what's resonating sort of in a uncomfortable way and they need more clarity. So it looks like Juan has his hand raised.
I just think that we should definitely talk about having this as an option, because I feel like we're at a point where we should decide to ask this hard to ask question, because I personally find it more offensive getting pulled over 5 times in 6 days. That's more offensive to me than being asked just upfront question. So I think we're at a point where this should definitely be done. So it's definitely something I feel like we should talk about. Maybe if we want to break up groups and we can personally go survey the town on how they feel about this question, or however, you guys may want to have it done.
So I'm gonna go to Cholwe because I haven't heard from her, and then Liz, and then it looks like Sam, you have your hand raised, right? Okay.
Okay, so I definitely think, if somebody asks me a question in a grocery store, what race I am, I'm gonna say, for what? But if we are aware, what we're trying to do is kind of empower the law enforcement a little bit so they can get a little bit more information about us in that context. And if it asks right, I would be willing to give up my identification, because there is a reason why they're asking. And if we're trying to get this data done in Red Wing, I think we need to do that, because Red Wing is a place where we do not have a place where we can actually go and tell our stories. I'm sure you all know that in Red Wing, we don't have a place where you can go and complain about what is going on in Red Wing about your race. There is no place to go and report. So this is one way of trying to get where we are trying to get, because Red Wing needs to be aware that there are people who feel like they're stopped 20 times in one day because of race. That's what I wanted to say.
So Liz and Samantha, what I all want you to be thinking about is 2 questions that Cholwe also brought up in Juan, this community survey portion. So let's keep that in the back of our minds. But Liz, go ahead, and then Sam.
I do think it's important to ask people, of course, do it in a respectful manner, so we don't, like I said, my children, no one's ever called my children Native. Even, they've never identified my children as Native. They all say they're Black. And I think Red Wing has a small enough community of color, and I think some of us on this panel are very tied into that community, where we can explain in intimate conversations why it's important to be asked this question, that it's beneficial, because we want to make sure that our community of color is not being targeted more than the white community in certain areas. And so I don't want to say it's how we sell it, but it is how we sell it. It's like it's a very positive step forward that we're trying to take to stop racial profiling in town. And the only way we're going to do that is if we can accurately identify the different races in town and who's being stopped. I would much rather, my son being given the chance to say, I'm Native American, than to be classified as African American if he's stopped, so he can more adequately represent his race, if that's where he feels he's identifying the most that day. Again, it is 100% on how it's asked. And I think maybe even we've talked about written cards given to people like, with the sexual assault. Maybe a narrative can be written up from this panel that an officer can hand somebody if they've, maybe in a couple of different languages to say, this is why we're doing this. Just a little blip that says, this is why we're doing this. I think if we do it a few times for a little while, word's going to spread of why we're doing it. And it's not going to take long for people to understand why we're doing what we're doing.
So before Samantha chimes in, Rob, what do you think about that? Have you heard best practices where people do give out cards or sort of warnings ahead of time to get community members and officers sort of acquainted to the process?
That would certainly work. There are some people that have actually written out the script for the officers how to ask the question. It's scripted, and they're obligated to go by the script, and that has worked very well. I think once officers get into the habit, they're going to build more trust within the community just by asking that one question and doing it authentically. As long as they're doing it authentically, I really feel it's going to build more trust and legitimacy, because people are going to be relieved, like Liz, like your children, right? They're being misraced. Is that a word? Misraced? Like being misgendered. The trans community are being misraced. I mean, it happens. And if you show that you're aware of it and you're trying to do the right thing, Chief, I don't think that's a win for the community, and it's a win for the police department. But script it out. Y'all will come up with a script and a little card that you can give to the cops, and they can go by the script.
All right, so Samantha and Sarah.
So I might view it wrong or see it differently, but between our community and our police department as it is currently. And that's why I think asking the race question is just not appropriate at this time. But Liz had a really good idea. I think that we just need to explore the options more, because I just think that it would be like throwing fuel on the fire type of thing, because there's just not trust. I hope that what was just said about building trust, that could work, or that it will work, but currently I don't think that it would make anything better. I also had a question. During these traffic stops and questions about your race, are you able to identify as more than one race, or are you checking the other box? Because, I mean, is there a blank line where you're writing in a race, or are you checking a box on which race it is? Because I know that I've been in situations where I've been told I could only choose one race for my children, and I will not answer that question, because that's not fair to them or either of their parents. So I was curious if anybody could answer that, on how more, like if a biracial person was asked what race they are.
Samantha, I think that if the community wanted biracial to be one of the races to be identified as, well, then the police department should have that as a choice, because it's got to be community centered and community driven for it to work. I mean, there is no rule book when it comes to this. Usually they use the census tract data, the races identified in the U.S. Census. But if there was something unique, I mean, biracial is not unique to Red Wing, but if you wanted that data collected, by all means, speak up and let it be heard. I don't think anything's off the table.
Yeah, I don't either. And I don't want you to sort of limit yourself into thinking that what's been happening in other cities or in Red Wing currently is what has to be. This advisory team is for you all to decide, you know, if it's that you want the script to be written and you're thinking, well, that's not going to work because it's fueling the flames. Well, maybe training is a part of that, you know, hiring someone to come in to train the officers around how you sort of move that conversation forward so that it's community driven, community centered, but also the officers can sort of weigh in on the process and how the trainings go, usually to give you some context. So I don't want you all to limit yourselves into what is possible, but I do think at this point, everything is possible, I would say, because you have to then give those recommendations to the city council and then they can sort of give you the guardrails. But if you don't sort of think big, then the guardrails are always going to be really small. So that's what I would sort of chime in and say. And I want to give the floor to Sarah, and I think Doug had his hand up as well.
I hear what Samantha's saying about being worried with the tension between the community and law enforcement, but I also think that this is really important data and we won't be able to move forward or make a lot of traction without it. And so figuring out as a team how we can get this into the community and let people know what we're doing and why is really important. I also think it's been kind of floating around in my head of immigration status and making sure that people know that this has nothing to do with immigration status and that that is not something that law enforcement is trying to get at. I just think that that piece could make people feel more fearful. And so just in our community awareness piece, making sure that that information is there.
Agreed. Doug, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I guess a couple of questions. One would be, talked a little bit about making the minority communities aware of this maybe policy we're recommending. Do we put it out there for them to decide? I'm just concerned that I'm hearing right now of would you rather have it be asked what your race is, or would you rather have the officer assume? Either way, we need to collect data, right? I mean, to move forward and make any kind of decisions, we need to have some kind of information. Now, you know, garbage in, garbage out is sort of how that works, right, Rob? And that's sort of, unfortunately, how data works. And so we need to have adequate categories. The idea of biracial makes sense. But if we're not comfortable, or the community is not comfortable having that question asked, and you know, we still need the data, then it's going to have to be assumed, but then we're going to have to live with that, you know, the result we get from that until we decide to change. Well, my other question would be for Rob. Have you seen in smaller communities like Red Wing, or if you've worked with other smaller communities with the smaller data sets, have you seen problems with that compared to, say, a large, you know, a larger sample size? Has there been some problems along those lines with your work so far?
Yeah. Some of our regression analysis require a large N for the count data to be analyzed properly. And the test of statistical significance that we use is so the data you'll be collecting is called count data, right? It's counting. And there's certain tests of statistical significance that are meant to be utilized for count data. And there's very few that really run a good test with a small sample size. So you're not going to be able to run a regression analysis on it. You're not going to be able to do a lot with it, but you will be able to tell based on the demographics of the community whether or not the counts are off and have disparities. However, you won't be able to control for crime, poverty, and some of the things that we control for in that regression analysis, that advanced statistical test that we run on bigger sample sizes.
Sure. Have you had anything in thinking about this biracial thing that Stan's brought up? Have you had any like a fragility index on some of these studies. So if you have a large biracial community and they're identifying as black or identifying as white, and how many would need to flip to change the meaning of what you're finding, or has that not been an issue you've come across?
That hasn't been something that we've explored. However, it's not to say that that's not something we may not explore moving forward. We have a very, very advanced statistical team, and so police data, administrative data is very messy.
Right, maybe it's not possible. It's not as clear cut as maybe.
It's really messy data to work with.
Sure.
Gotcha. So I want to call on a few people that haven't sort of spoken, because I want to see a temperature check of how the room is feeling around some of these things. So Yadira, Corey K, I haven't heard from you guys. Officer Huberty, I haven't heard from you. Michael, Steve, and Alexis, I know your video's off, but if you all feel that you have something to contribute or you want to think about this and sort of raise some questions or concerns, now's the time. Looks like Corey K.
I think this discussion has been really good. For me, I had kind of a delusional kind of interpretation of where I thought society had been at, and was actually offended when race data was still on forms. I thought, once we got to 2000, 2010, I'm like, haven't we moved beyond this where we are just Americans? And so I went through a long time where I was offended that we were still even asking that data because I thought it shouldn't matter. But this has been really eye-opening to realize that it really does matter. I just, for me, teaching my kids, I always try to get them not to see color, just to see people. So it's hard to maybe going back to this point where we have to do that. I wish we were much further advanced as a nation than we have become, and that's pretty obvious now that it really is important. So I'm on board, but still a little bit disheartened that we need to be going back to a place that this matters. So I guess that's where I'm coming from. But I think it's good. I think we need to do it. I'm just sorry that we have to do it.
Yeah, me too. But unfortunately, stories of violence against Black people, brown people, and marginalized people, the stories are not enough. Even the data sometimes is not enough. The policies are not enough. And so you need all of those factors working together to ensure that you have a case to prove your humanity. And that sucks. It really does. But if you have all of your ducks in a row, it makes it much easier to be able to sort of claim a case on your humanity than having no evidence or no data and only stories. Video footage helps, all of those things sort of help. I'm really disappointed that we are in a place where it feels like you have to prove that you matter. I think that's really tough for folks. So I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate you for sort of stepping up and saying that. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add? Yadira, Alexis, Michael, Officer? Okay, Steve, it looks like you had your hand up.
Yeah, I know. I wrote down kind of what Doug was talking about when I went over the information before the meeting on how this would relate to a small town like this when all the examples were given, of large cities. So we're going to have that small sample size. So how that's gonna work. And then when I read through part of the information, when you're talking about traffic stops and such, how you have officers like state troopers. You want to be a state trooper, you want to pull over people and you want to work traffic. That's no different than a deputy or a city officer. Some officers like to run a lot of traffic, so they're writing a lot of tickets, or I shouldn't say that. They're making a lot of stops. Other officers may do a lot of residential patrol and things like that. So in the studies, when I read through it, it almost seemed like, okay, now we're going to rule out the officers who are making too many traffic stops and we're gonna, kind of penalize for the officers that aren't making enough traffic stops versus looking into why they're making those traffic stops. Are they valid? Making sure they're valid. If they're, stop, say the person that likes to do a lot of traffic stop, if everybody stops doing 12, 14, 15 miles an hour over the speed limit or are drunk driving, then to me, that seems like he should be able to stop as many people as he wants. So it's just that area which, kind of confused me.
So I had this conversation with the chief, and we had a real good conversation about it. And that's where the data comes in. You probably get a lot of complaints about speeding in certain neighborhoods, but you want to be able to deploy your officers efficiently because you don't have an unlimited amount of officers. So you want to make sure that there's actually is speeding in that neighborhood before you set someone up there with a radar gun and for 8 hours and he catches one person. The same with equipment violations. Officers will say they pull people over for equipment violations, whether it's a blinker out or something dangling from their rearview mirror because it's a safety and it causes accidents. But when you really look at the data, only a small percent of accidents are caused by equipment. Most of them is driver inattention. Right? So when you start thinking that way, well, I'm going to pull people over who are on their cell phone, then you're going to reduce the number of accidents as opposed to those other reasons, which in the officer's mind, he's going to reduce accidents, but the data doesn't support that. And the other way around, if you start pulling people over who are talking on their cell phone, or if you go one step further, if you find an intersection that has a large amount of accidents, and then you start pulling people over on their cell phone at that intersection, you can track whether or not the accidents are going down. So, when we talk about efficiencies, we're talking about that. And oftentimes people pull people over for those equipment violations, hoping to do a little more of a criminal investigation. Right? They're going to look in the back seat. They're going to ask, can I search your vehicle? I'm not saying that's happening in Red Wing, but that's kind of a generalized police practice. However, there is some validity to that if it's done with the right people in the right neighborhoods, those people who are responsible for a large amount of crime. So if you're pulling people over outside those areas where there's a lot of crime and you're searching 20 cars and only one of the 20 you find any kind of evidence, that's not an efficient use of police labor, nor is it, and it's going to drive those disparities. So if you can strategically implement those traffic stops and pull over those people that are responsible for a large amount of crime, you're going to find more evidence in less time. So that's what, we talk about efficiencies that way. We're certainly not telling people not to enforce the law. We're suggesting they enforce the law in more of a strategic, laser-focused way. Does that make sense? I hope I wasn't talking in circles. Sometimes I do that.
All right.
I think Yadira had her hand up too.
Yeah, she had her hand up. I was about to say that.
Yeah, can you? Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure my thing's still showing that it's on mute, but yeah, it was just that, it's just a lot of I'm kind of in the middle. I believe that yes, it's a good idea that we collect this data, so it's there, and we have all that information, but at the same time, I just don't want any kind of certain race to be, kind of or scared or start wondering why this question's being asked. Or like Juan said, we can go door to door serving people, letting them know what we're doing. But it's just that I'm just kind of still torn in the middle about that question being asked. So I'm just kind of listening to everybody just having really good ideas of how it should be handled or how the information should be thrown out there to people, letting them know that this process is going to start.
Thank you for sharing. So I want to tag in Officer Huberty and the chief. So you've been working with Rob sort of on this. And I want to hear sort of what you have been doing, because I don't think everybody else has heard that. And what are you sort of hearing now, and how do you feel that's going to play into the larger sort of recommendations that it seems that the group is leaning towards or thinking about?
Corey, you want to go first, or I don't want to dominate the conversation?
Yeah, you're fine. I mean, I guess for me, I'm just kind of more of listening in on the feedback from everybody on how we're going to proceed, you know, as the instructor, how I'm going to kind of take your guys' descriptions of what your feelings are and how we're going to teach this to the officers as far as moving forward with this. As far as the actual data collection part and how we're going to do it from that standpoint, I guess that'd be more up to the chief on what we're actually going to search for and whatnot.
Thanks, Corey. And I guess, yeah, for myself, there's a lot of moving parts with this. It's doable, and I think it's very important to conduct this this study and to collect this data. I know we had a lot of conversations on a lot of different areas because I've been in law enforcement over 34 years now. And that's a long history. There's no way when my first day on the job, we don't do anything similar to that back then. I mean, time has changed. Courts have required different requirements, and communities have asked different duties of their officers. You know, back then we hardly did any social service type of things, and now we do a majority of social service type of activities. So, you know, trying to identify how to capture the best data to give us the best information. Like we said, I hate repeating reliability and validity, but that's where it's going to be all at. If we're not collecting good data to have good results and good statistics to move forward and properly educate and train the department, but not only that, but educate and train and not train, but educate our citizens also on why we do what we do. You know, you've heard me say numerous times that the police are the public and the public are the police. We have to be one for a successful community and a peaceful community and to improve quality of life issues. So I feel this is very important, but it's a team effort between the community and the law enforcement agency to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. I guess I do have one question though, because as I sit here and I listen, there's one thing, you know, a lot of people say we need to collect this data to show that law enforcement officers are not targeting people of color. Well, if that's what we're trying to identify, then my thought is we would not want to ask somebody their race because we want to capture that officer's mindset of what he thought their race was. And because if that's what the question is, then don't we want that data? And I guess I would really like your opinions and consideration of that, because if we ask, somebody could say that they associate with black, but they appear more white to the officer. It opens up some different things that we want to make sure, like I said, we're collecting the data that we need to achieve what our community expects us to achieve. Dr. or Rob, any thoughts?
No, that's a great point, and that's a point that's made in the guidebook. That the perception of the officer is important. It is important but it's that perception of the individual's race when they first decided to either make a pedestrian stop or vehicle stop. That certainly comes into play. However you want, that's a tough one. That's a tough one to collect. You know, that's a tough ask, and it's a tough one to be reliable.
Gotcha. Sam, do you want to jump in?
I just wanted to say that leaving the perception of race up to the officer. Personally, is the perception of the, or like, can the police officers that are making the traffic stop say, oh, I thought that this person was white when I pulled them over, but it turns out they're not, and then just write whatever is gonna, make them feel better, or the person reviewing the data see otherwise. Does that make sense? The way I'm saying, like the way I worded that?
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
this
I
is
think
one of the
that accurate
questions.
answers would be getting the questions from the person. I just think that asking the person is questionable as well.
So Rob, I wanted to ask you, because something I learned with working at CPE is that the cities where people don't collect for race, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm learning this as I'm learning from sort of the officers at CPE, that when you're doing this perception piece, many times it becomes unknown because the officers don't want to guess. So it's like when you're trying to then collect the data and you're doing all the analysis, you have so many unknowns. So then it's like, so what?
Yeah.
If everybody's unknown, how do you actually decide that there is a disparity?
Yeah, and that's exactly right, Dominique. Here in Southeast Virginia, there's a large Afro-Caribbean community, right? Dominican, Puerto Rico, and so the officer may think that person is black when they first decide to pull them over or stop them. However, they get into a conversation and they have a heavy Spanish accent. So the officer doesn't know, oh my God, is this guy Hispanic or is he black? He looks black, but he speaks Hispanic, he speaks Spanish. So they check unknown. And that's exactly what happens often, Dominique. We were looking at one of the big cities, and I want to say almost 30% of the time, officers checked unknown for pedestrian vehicle stops. We suspect it's because they didn't want to ask whether or not how that person identified. And that's just one example I'm talking about, is the Afro-Caribbean, because that's something that happens often here in Southeast Virginia because there's such a large Afro-Caribbean community.
So before I get to you, Liz, I want to do a temperature check. Who is here sort of for perception, leaving it to the officers to sort of answer that question? Raise your hand. Just want to see. All right, nobody. So everybody is sort of leaning toward the, if done properly, if all the things were aligned and we put that in place, sort of collecting for race. Yes, hands, thumbs, faces. All right, looking good. So I'm going to turn over to Liz now. I just wanted to get a temperature check here.
So I'm speaking totally from my heart. I am not meant to offend anyone that's listening or on this panel. I know for my children, especially for one, involvement with authority, the police especially, to identify as a black male is the scariest thing he can identify with. And he would probably choose to identify with one of his other races if he's asked. Because categorically, in sentencing in that, it's proven that the black males are sentenced harsher often. So if he's asked, he's probably going to identify either as Native American or Hispanic, his other races, rather than if he's asked, but if an officer assumes by looking at him.
So how do you account for that, Rob?
There's no way to account for that. You just have to use. Oh, first of all, Liz, you're absolutely right, and thank you for lifting that up, because I was just looking at the statistics today. The largest cause of death for black males between 20 and 29 is police violence. So you're absolutely correct. Young black males in that age range die more from police violence than cancer, chronic disease, lightning strike, getting hit by cars, right? So you can't deny that, Liz. I mean, it's the data's there to suggest that that's a real issue for Black males, police violence. So, there's no way around it. I mean, that's just it is what it is, and something people you have to be aware of.
So it looks like Doug has his hand up. Thank you for sharing, Liz.
Where does that data come from? Like, I'd be interested in seeing it. That just sort of piques my interest. That an age category in police violence. I mean, violent crime. I've heard that statistic before. Person on person crime, but I've not heard it before being police violence as the most common cause of death. So I'd just be interested in that study.
I think you're on mute. You're on mute.
I'm so sorry. There's I have a folder full of studies that support that, and the one I'm quoting from is it's from the National Academy of Sciences, 2019 study. Risk of being killed by police use of force in the United States by age, race, ethnicity, and sex.
Can we get a copy of that? Does everybody want a copy of that to be able to read over? Okay, we'll get you a copy of that. All right, so I think for me, I want to hear a little bit. So when we're thinking about moving into January and sort of pulling some of these recommendations to the city council, are we in sort of a consensus that we do want to collect data? Yes. Everybody, we're collecting, but what are we deciding that we're going to collect for? Yadira, your hand was up. I think you're on mute. Still can't. And try one more time.
Maybe try to press the space bar. Do you have a space bar, Yadira? Try to press the space bar.
Not working. I can read your lips, but I can't.
Maybe we can.
Yeah, so we will, when you can sort of get that working, just chime in and we can stop so you can get your comment out. So yes, we want to collect for race. Or do we want to do a survey for the rest of the community? Because I want to hear a little bit more about that survey piece that Juan sort of brought up, because that could be an avenue that gets at more of the community aspect and information that may have some of you on the fence about how we do this and if it's something that everybody wants. So Juan, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're thinking for that?
Well, it's just, I guess I don't really know how to go about it. I mean, it's definitely a suggestion. I mean, if the study, if study's already there and those are facts that, I mean, African Americans, that is the largest cause of death. I mean, if that study's there, like, I just can't understand why other people aren't trying to acknowledge that. Like, I mean, that right there is a study. That's data right there. I mean, we're just going to get more data and it's going to be the same exact data. But, so yeah, I think that's a good idea for maybe, like I said, I can only speak for myself and I personally wouldn't get offended because, I mean, we're talking right now and I'm thinking about it in the aspect of for a positive, but I can't speak for anybody else. I'd be, just to have people informed if we do about that, just to have people informed so they know that this is why they're being asked and they take it in a different way. But I just feel like if I feel like there's a lot of questions that are asked that have a negative outlook of them. So why not just ask this difficult question, have a positive outcome, and maybe get some more data if more data is needed to get more people on board? Because I mean, if the data is already there, I mean, It just seems obvious to me.
Thank you for sharing. Cholwe, I want to tag you in.
I do understand that as a Black, I do have young Black men who I think looking at that study is kind of scary. But I also want to give a shout out to the Black people or the minorities. I don't know who identifies what, but I really think this is the time we should work with law enforcement. And because what I understand in Red Wing, there is no racism. There is no racism according to the community of Red Wing. I know I am Black and I know what I've gone through. Okay? So, Black people out there, if we're gonna do this survey, we need to tell the city of Red Wing that racism exists. But without numbers, we cannot convince the city that this really is there. I'm talking from experience, me, my family, and everyone out there who I have talked to experienced this. This is a chance we have to work with police, with law enforcement, to see if we can bridge this gap we have. Yes, I'm scared of you, the law enforcement, but not really, not you. But I know a lot of people like me are scared of law enforcement. They don't want to be asked any questions. And the moment we get asked questions, we are thinking we are going to be tased or shot, and we think like that. But I just want to appeal that to all the Black people around the Red Wing. This is how we're gonna start. I know we don't get along, but I think we should start somehow so we can narrow this gap, and maybe we'll be able to understand the law enforcement, and maybe they'll be able to understand us, so that as we raise our children in this community, we can stay home and wait for them to come back from school or work without worrying if the child is gonna show up or not. So I don't think I like to give people what I am. People already know, but I think this is gonna help. I'm just appealing. If we're gonna go and do this survey, I just want you people, Black people who are going to hear about this. This is for the good. This is us. And I identify, I am Black. I'm never gonna change, and I'm proud of it. We should be able to say it. We are Black. We have to start from there. And to the parents of young Black men and women, we need to instill this in our children. They need to understand that they are Black. It's a very difficult subject, especially in maybe Samantha's household, my household, Michael, Liz, and I don't know, and maybe everybody else on here, because we have mixed families where my children, I think they're biracial, but they are Black when they are seen by law enforcement. So we need to make our children understand what we are trying to do here. We are trying to make this better, I hope. That's why I'm here anyway. So we do want to make this work so that we can prove to the community, to the city council, that racism actually does exist in Red Wing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Mic drop. But honestly, I hear everything you're saying, and as someone who works with law enforcement, and I'm a facilitator, so I don't want to get personal, you all, but as someone who works directly with law enforcement every day and works with the chief and talks to officers, and still Black, still having to deal with these issues, still afraid that if I get in my car, the minute I see a police officer, I'm turning the corner because I'm afraid that it'll be one wrong thing and I'm gonna be a hashtag, I'm gonna be on the news, and everything bad about me that ever happened will be at the front. I could be doing 75 good things and it'll come to the front. So what I would say is that data is the most important thing. And it sucks that you have to put this out there, but if you don't put it out there and advocate for yourselves and think about how you're going to collect this to be able to prove that there is a problem, you could do all the studies in the world, and if it says it's a problem, it says it's a problem, then you have more access to policymakers that will believe what you're trying to say. So I'm not trying to steer you one way or the other. I'm just saying that. And Juan, I want to tag you in. Go ahead, Juan. You're on mute.
I just got a question for Roger and Hubert. I just want to know how that makes you feel hearing that and hear me say that has never been an option for me. How does that make you feel?
Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, it's not good. I mean, obviously, we want you to feel comfortable calling the police. We try to do as many community-oriented programs as we can. COVID has obviously put a delay to that. I've always felt the officers that I've worked with here have always been very good. Never seen any major issues, I guess, with partners. So here, I mean, this is our opportunity to sit down and talk to the community and I guess hear concerns and try to figure out how we're going to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. I look back at my career and I've always thought I've tried to help people no matter what color or what their religious background or their race, ethnicity, or anything. And sorry, I saw somebody shaking their head no.
I gotta chime in, Chief. I gotta chime in because we've talked about
That
this
was
sort
me
of
shaking
together.
my head.
I know.
Okay,
Yeah,
so here's where I want to.
It's hard to hear, but we got to hear the hard conversations. That's how I look at it. Thank you.
So here's where I want to weigh in on that. So what I'm hearing from community is that in Red Wing, racism does exist. And what I'm hearing from sort of the other conversation, the public narrative, is that it doesn't. And so what I would encourage you all to do is think about, as we talk about the data, as we talk about what we want to see, you're really trying to understand the problem. And it's ridiculous that you would have to understand racism. Like it's disgusting. But the fact is that you're going to have to understand it. And the way that you do that is by looking at the localized context of your city, what data you have access to, where there are gaps in resources and services for particular communities and why, because the data will be able to pinpoint that. And so I think that working to get the data collection up to a place where it's going to show something is a start. It's not everything, but it is a start. Sarah?
I know that in our community, there are many people who believe that racism doesn't exist in Red Wing or doesn't exist at all. Right now on social media, there's big arguments and fights going on about this group that have been popping up all over the place. And I'm wondering what people's thoughts would be of going to the council and asking them to do like an educational campaign. There were stats today that I had never heard before, and other people have mentioned that they've never heard before. And knowing that these things are real, but not having numbers behind them, that if there was some sort of educational piece that could go out in some capacity into our community to do some education might be helpful.
I think I saw Cholo's hand.
Well, that's me again. And the reason I wanted to follow up with Sarah is because, can I say, sit on the human rights? And I'm also in the community a lot because of my job and because I have a big mouth. I like people. So I talk to people because I like to meet new people. I like people. I suck for that. So, but I hear a lot of complaints in my ears, and I can share stories. You see this lady here? A month ago, I showed up to show a house. I'll make it quick. I was called on that. There was no reason apart from because I'm Black. The house was for sale. Of course, I cannot go in a house. Nobody really goes in the middle of the day with their car and opens the house and loads a lot of people to see the house. But because of my color, the neighbor called in. They didn't call the law enforcement, but they called in because of me. Now, what I'm trying to say is, I've been here 3 years, and I can't remember. I can write 9, 10 incidences where I was classified as Black, which I already know. But I don't have a place to go and talk about this. So we suggested the suggestion is we need a place where we can talk about this so that the city can see, actually, the council can see that actually these things happen in Red Wing. Because again, without data, there's nothing we can do here. We're gonna spend Wednesdays here, but we're not gonna achieve. We need to know the numbers in the state of the Red Wing. And I think law enforcement is gonna lead us into that way so that the city council can also see that we need this to happen. When I feel like I'm offended and I'm called Black where I shouldn't be called Black, even if I am, I should be able to report and let somebody know about this information so that it can be jotted down that this incident happens. But as it is right now, there is no place where you can find that information. Not a place you can talk to apart from talking to other Black people, and then we are all fueled up. We are mad because this is going on and nobody's really listening. Nobody's helping. Nobody's here in this community to hear those things. So this is why I say it's going to start from here. We need data. We need to know what's going on because we can't just go and say, okay, I was offended. There's a racism. No, there's not. No, there's not. We should show numbers. And that's why I am in support of this so that we can tie it around and show this community how lovely it is because it's a lot of people, a lot of flowers, different flowers. But without that information, we are not going to go anywhere. We need to find it.
Thank you. Michael, I saw your hand up.
Straight to it. The reason I was shaking my head is because the chief is sitting there saying that they care and they're concerned. Well, if they were concerned, why was it when I called just recently to report something, I was no trespassing sign and some cameras? That shows me they don't care. Man. I called to make a report. I couldn't even get an officer to come to my house. I've been trying to touch base with chief about certain issues and won't nobody get back to me. So who do you care for if you're going to sit there and say you care? So that's why I was shaking my head.
So I have a question. Thank you for sharing that, Michael, which brings me to a question that so it's for Rob and for the chief. What are your policies in Red Wing for sort of the complaint aspect? Because Choloway sort of spoke about complaints, Michael has complaints, and Rob, I'm going to tag you in when the chief is finished for what are best practices for complaints? And then sort of, Chief, can you talk about the complaint process here? Because what I'm hearing is that people want data collected. You do want to collect by race or sort of think about collecting for race. I don't want to say that you have decided on that. What I'm also hearing is that there's no place for complaints that is happening. And maybe that is, but if it's not happening to people that they feel it can be reported, that's a problem. So Chief, can you speak a little bit about the complaint process? And then Rob, what are sort of general practices for that?
Yes, and I think the complaint process that we're talking about is a complaint against employee that the situation was not handled appropriately or they did not respond effectively. As far as complaint against employees, we have a written form for a formal complaint. Every written form comes across my desk. Every one of them is taken very seriously. The Minnesota Post Board, which is our licensing agency, requires that local agencies have a process in place and a policy in place to handle complaints against employees or complaints against the department. What happens to us, there's 3 levels. There's administrative, which is more those things that don't really fall into policy or criminal. They're more the person was rude and the behavior was probably awful, although it didn't violate policy or crimes. The second level would violate policy, and that would be an administrative internal complaint. And those are looked at by, well, first off, the reviews are handled by the sergeant, the immediate supervisor. The second one, the internal administrative, are handled by either my investigators or one of the captains because of the potential for a policy violation. And then the third level is an internal investigation, which is criminal in nature, that if the officer did do that performance, they would be committing a crime and could be charged accordingly. Because of those and the seriousness of those, we farm those out to another agency. And it's got to be an agency that doesn't work with us on a daily basis, is not aware of us, would have no conflicts of interest. BCA has done some of those. Other county sheriffs out of the area have come in and investigated those for us. But our main goal is to be as objective as possible in handling the complaint process involving the department. And then the final thing is per Minnesota statute, I review all the final reports and determine a course of action that is needed to correct the behavior, or if nothing was found, it can be, the outcomes are pretty much 3 categories. Can be unfounded, which means the investigation doesn't support the complaint. Can be not sustained, which means there's nothing as far as solid information to support the complaint. However, there is indications that something occurred or went wrong. And then there's sustained, which means the incident did happen and it needs to be corrected. It happened as it was stated. I've also had sometimes, everybody that files a written complaint gets a written response from me regarding the outcome of the complaint. And we have had some complaints where the citizen was not happy with the outcome of the investigation, and I've given them the number for the Office of Civil Rights office for the FBI, or the Attorney General's number, for them to elevate their complaint to either the state level or to the Office of Civil Rights. Because I feel that we do the best we can to be fair in those investigations, and I'm not afraid to have internal review or an external review on our conduct. So, Rob?
Sorry, Chief, I didn't mean that. That kind of complaint. I'm sorry about that. I meant a general complaint, not pertaining to law enforcement. I just had to tie it in to talk about what the community as a whole is. I didn't really mean in your department.
And thank you for that also, because that you start to get into the other complaints, which Mr. Holmes was talking about with a call that he had to our agency and the incident report format of potential crime or potential action that occurred. Most of ours that we have control over would be criminal investigations. There's also civil matters. Some of what you're talking about might be more of a civil matter because as sad as it is, racism on itself yet does not have a specific statute that makes it a crime. The actions and conducts that come about from it could end up being a crime. But, you know, there are other things that what we've done also is to document those concerns of our citizens, because if they go talk to a private attorney, the attorney may want to try to pursue some type of civil action, and having that initial police report on file can help in those cases. So there are times when, even though it might not be anything that we can handle successfully or is not a violation of criminal statute, we will do reports to assist other agencies or to assist our citizens in what they may pursue later. So I hope I worded that appropriately, but I guess I'll let Rob follow up. And
just real quick, some of the more progressive police departments have started text a complaint, email a complaint. There's a phone call. You can make an in-person complaint, or they have a supervisor respond to your location to take a complaint. But two of the biggest ones now are text a complaint and email a complaint. And it's a mailbox. It could be Office of Professional Standards at redwingpolicedepartment.com or you know. So, and they're making those vehicles for complaints more accessible on either text form or email form. Really is a positive step in the communities.
I guess along those lines, Rob, thank you for reminding me. We did put funds in our budget to subscribe to TIP 411 next year in 2021. And TIP 411 is exactly that. You can make an anonymous tip to law enforcement through text messaging or other avenues. It can also be used for us to put out key messages in certain neighborhoods if something happened that we need people to help us keep an eye out. It's kind of like a two-way street for effective communications. But as Rob was saying, I think a big value is it'll give our citizens a chance to file those concerns or complaints that then we could possibly forward to other agencies within city government.
I think that's what people are getting at, is that the review process is too close to the department. And I don't want to speak for you all, but I'm getting the sense that if you're sending in complaints or tips, that could be sort of where the gap is. Is there sort of a space where if you are texting or you are emailing chief, that the sort of complaints could go to like a review board or a civilian oversight board or somewhere that's like a neutral third party that could review these things?
Right, and that gets into the whole civilian oversight portion. I don't know where Minnesota stands on that, but there's several models of that.
Yeah.
And
so, Pete, do you want to chime in there, or Rob, do you want to talk about what that is?
Just go ahead, Chief.
Go ahead. Well, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. In Minnesota, the chief law enforcement officer is responsible for the corrective actions within his department. He can take advice or recommendations from a civilian oversight panel, but at the end of the day, Minnesota statute requires that the chief law enforcement person for that jurisdiction determines the discipline and corrective action for the employee.
Gotcha. So I know that we have about 5-6 minutes left. So for next steps, would it be helpful for us to send you all sort of the piece that Rob was referring to in terms of the data, and other best practices because what I'm hearing is more about the complaint pieces for the department. So maybe some research on that aspect of it. What I want to get a sense of for, I guess, the next time or even now is, what else do you need to know that would be helpful to sort of explore deeper into this conversation? Liz and Doug, and then we 1 minute each because we want to wrap up at 9.
I would like to know what somebody like Choloway has for recourse when she's called in on that. I mean, that, obviously that she's dealing with her personal income. I mean, whenever I've seen Choloway in the community, she's impeccably dressed. She's, that person who called in, I doubt Choloway was not the only person who she saw try and enter that house for a sale. If those customers were there, I'm sure that upset Choloway, it upset the customers, it broke that relationship. What does a person have, a marginalized person in our community have as recourse for when they're falsely called in on something like this to the person who calls in, to the Karens of the community? then what? You called me in. It was totally it was a horrible call. Now what can I do? Because you've damaged my reputation. You've maybe lost a sale for me of a commission of a house. Now what can Choloway do? Just take it? Oops, sorry. I called in the black person, but another white person can show the house 10 times that day?
So, Rob, we need to probably dive deeper into that, Liz. And I know that we have only 4 minutes. So, I think for me, that is coming to sort of a space where you all have been asking about as well for the falsely accused. I want to be able to take that question because one of the things I've been seeing in the news a lot, and Rob, jump in here really quick, is about people sort of putting policies around the Karen Act or things like that. So that's, again, not out of the realm of possibility for Red Wing as a recommendation. So I just want to hold that there. I acknowledge sort of your comments, Liz, and I think that they would fit really nicely into the work that you all want to do when it comes to the falsely accused and sort of the reconciliation piece to that. Are there any final questions? Rob, do you have any final thoughts that could be helpful? Doug looks like he has his hand. Doug, got really 1 minute. So I want to hold you guys.
Yeah, my one quick question would be, as we get this data, is there someone in the county who can help us analyze it and figure out how we communicate that to the community at large? Because how you present the data, can rapidly change things. That's why I was so taken aback with that statement Rob made about police violence being the number one cause of death from people 20 to 29 Black Americans. Because that's the data that I'm aware of. It makes it hard, and it just depends on how you represent this stuff, right?
Right.
So I just didn't know if there's someone in the county who'd be doing that, or if we'd be talking to someone like Rob again once we have data in, I don't know, a couple of years or however long it takes.
My recommendation is that you would find a local academic partner that would be willing to work with y'all. I know there's a great the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at University of Minnesota has some really strong academics. Joe Sauce is there, and this is right up his alley. But find a local academic partner that's in the community that's willing to work with you. That's what we did in Ithaca, where we're working in upstate New York. We found local academic partners that know the community, that know the culture and the feel and what's going on, because they're best suited to represent that. But before we go, I just want to say thank you for everyone here for showing up and having these hard conversations, because people aren't having these hard conversations. They're hiding and hoping this goes away. And it says something for the culture of Red Wing, that everyone can get together and have really hard conversations in a civilized manner. And I just have to applaud each and every one of you. Thank you so much.
All right. And with that, I don't have anything better to say, but thank you all for sort of showing up as your best selves. We are going to send some of those materials out. As you all have more questions for Rob, Michelle can sort of correlate them into, as she does for all of us, and then we can have those answered directly while we have this long break. And just to recap, it seems that data collection is important, and we really need to figure out a way to collect for race as we do that, and then sort of complaints. So let's really think about that. We'll send some materials out for the holidays. Oh, that's terrible. Send materials out about bad things over the holidays. But we'll send some materials out timely so that it doesn't interrupt your holiday space, and that you can sort of take a look at. And again, if you have questions, we're here to answer them so that as you're doing the pre-work before we come to the next meeting, you feel empowered and prepared. So again, thank you all.
Yeah. Dominique, I have one question before we go. So for the next, are you seeing that our next meeting in January would be a portion of that? Would that some work would happen before the next meeting to figure out and to bring back to the team? I'm just thinking through this as we're winding down here, that it sounds like the team does want to do data collection. There are some questions on how we do that and how we communicate to that. And there are folks on staff who can help think about that and help communicate that. But it seems like work would have to be done between now and the next meeting to
what's a good place
talk
for
to
me
law
to plug?
enforcement and best practices around communities who've done that successfully.
Well, it's a best place for me to plug. Rob and I host Community Connections once a month for CPE for communities to come to do this work. So we have policy folks that do that. Rob will speak for law enforcement and be able to help us. We have data folks. So that is happening December 14th. So what we could do is compile all the questions and folks can come and have those questions answered and get some pre-work done so that when you come back in January, you're like hitting the ground running and you have your recommendations. What I don't want to do is say that everybody is a consensus that we're going to collect for race, because that's not what I picked up today. What I picked up is that you may want more information to be able to make that decision. And so we're happy to sort of think about that to get you what you need for everybody to be able to be on the same page about it. And maybe it's that we collect it in a certain way, or we do other things, or we survey the community, but it needs to make sure that it's a consensus that that's what we want to do. So happy to give you that pre-reading. Give you the flyer for Community Connections if you want to come and ask more specific questions. We have about 10 community groups that are doing this on the 14th from all over the country that are working on issues like yourselves. And some of them are like advisory teams. And then some of them are just everyday working people who banded together and wanted to do something. So it's a place for everybody. And I think that it could be helpful for you all as you do your pre-work before you come to these meetings. So that's all I have to say. I want to leave you with that. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them to Michelle. Send them, can't send them to me, but Michelle has a process for you all to send them so that we can answer them ahead of time. But thank you again.
And I'll send out a link for your Monday night. I'll send out a link for Monday night, correct? Because that's when you all are holding
Yes,
that
Monday the 14th.
event.
Oh my goodness. Yes,
Yeah.
Monday. I guess Monday is the 14th. So if you want to come, we do not serve refreshments. There's no, it's no party, but it's a collaboration of folks who are really interested in this. And they do a lot of pre-work in this meeting before they go to their task force. So just letting you all know. All right, everybody. It was really nice to see you guys. Peace out.